Resident Evil 4 is a bona fide classic, one of the best games ever made, and so it was inevitable that a remake would happen. And while a lot of classic moments and characters are coming back for this new take on the legendary horror game, some things are also changing this time around, and I will highlight them in this video. Make sure you stick with me until the end of the video. Without further delay, let's get into it. The Resident Evil 4 stems from the old setup of Resident Evil 2. Originally released back in 2005 exclusively for the Nintendo GameCube, Resident Evil 4 is considered by many to be one of the best third-person action horror games ever made, mixing classic survival horror elements with the then-new over-the-shoulder camera angle and combat controls. The story stars Resident Evil 2's Leon Kennedy as he takes on a mission to save the president's daughter after she was grabbed by a weird cult in Eastern Europe. When he arrived, he quickly learned that the locals were all infected with an odd parasite, Las Plagas, turning them and local animals into dangerous monsters. This followed a lot of killing and inventory sorting, and this new remake seems to mostly be following that same setup, but with some small tweaks and possibly bigger changes to the classic formula. In the first gameplay video Capcom showed off during the big digital showcase event, we saw what appeared to be a recreation of the iconic opening hour of Resident Evil 4. Leon was on the hunt for clues about the missing daughter, Ashley Graham, and stumbled upon a dilapidated farmhouse. Unlike the original game, this time it was even creepier, as the scene was set in the middle of the night. What changes were spotted in the new Resident Evil 4 remake trailer? At one point, after entering a creepy basement filled with skulls, Leon found one of his police escorts dead and heard over the radio the other escorts having an, bad time. This also is a change from the original. While these escorts also suffered unhappy fates in the classic game, how Leon learned about them was slightly different. I'm excited to see how else Capcom changed up the exact way certain events played out, keeping the overall story similar, but tweaking the smaller beats. Oh, and Leon can crouch now. Neat. When Leon reached the village, he found a similar scene as in the original, and just like before, he had to fight off the nasty locals, including a chainsaw-wielding maniac who could kill with one strike. During this fight, we saw that Leon could still employ the classic stun, kick, kill combo, which I always rely on a lot to save ammo. He also killed a poor cow when he set the barn on fire while escaping. Kind of a jerk move, Leon. During all of this action, we could see that Leon has learned how to move and shoot at the same time, something you couldn't do in the original game, but could in the recent VR edition. I know some folks are worried that this could kill the game's famous tension, but I'm also curious to see how Capcom takes advantage of the player's newly boosted mobility to ratchet up the intensity during larger fights. Capcom also explained some of the other changes it's made in the Resident Evil 4 remake during the full live stream. Leon now has a new parry, which allows him to use his knife to counter enemy attacks. This will likely be useful, as Capcom said the villagers are now more bloodthirsty and have more ways to kill and attack you. He also used his knife to block a chainsaw from cutting him in half, a good reminder that this is still Resident Evil and things will get campy. Oh, and yes, the amazing attaché case inventory system is back. Thankfully, crafting and equipping items like herbs seems more streamlined and easier in the original, taking some cues from the VR port perhaps. The merchant is also back, and while he still sells and buys things, he also now accepts gems as currency, letting you trade these valuable rocks for new gear and items, something not found in the original Resident Evil 4. Finally, Capcom dropped a new story trailer that features some interesting hints about what else might be changing. At one point, we saw Ashley, fully infected with the parasite, pulled a gun on someone, possibly Leon or Ada. This didn't happen in the classic game, and I'll be interested to see if this is a real moment or some sort of fake out from the dream sequence. That story trailer also gave us our first look at some iconic moments, like the boss fight against the lake monster, and a better look at the new take on Ada Wong. Everything here has me excited. The small and possibly big changes to both the gameplay and the story seems smart. Nothing so far looks to be ruining the vibes and the feel of the original game. But even if Capcom bungles this, I'm not too worried. Of all the games in the world, few are as easily accessible across nearly every platform as Resident Evil 4. So if this ends up being a disappointment, I can always go back to the original and enjoy it all over again. That is to say, I'm down for Capcom to shake things up at Resident Evil 4's storyline and combat. Resident Evil 4 Remake will be out on March 24th, 2023 on PS4, PS5, Xbox Series X/S, and PC. PS4 owners will be able to upgrade the game to the PS5 version for free too, and the pre-orders are now open too. Next up, let's talk about the best Resident Evil games of all time. Resident Evil is a tough series to build a list for. At times gruesome, frustrating, and camp-soaked in equal measure, the series is so prolific that you can find both genre-defining masterpieces and forgettable duds bearing the Resident Evil name. It's such a fundamental series for the growth of video games, and I, as a gamer who some eccentrics may find charming and nostalgic, can make some titles just plain painful for the rest of the fan base. But make no mistake, the joy of working in volume is that there's a Resident Evil game for everyone. That said, let's dive into my list of the best Resident Evil games. The first in my list is Resident Evil 4. The Resident Evil saga has changed perspective and genre several times, but no episode has been as groundbreaking as Resident Evil 4. The evolution of Resident Evil games, which evolved from survival horror games with a closed camera and tank controls to third-person survival horror action game, it was just awesome. Resident Evil 4 was and still is an absolutely amazing and near-perfect video game. The campaign is massive and full of gigantic bosses, epic stages, and locations, matched only by the perfect gameplay that offers the player plenty of weapons and actions to use against hordes of hideous enemies. There was nothing like it back then, and it not only changed the course of survival horror games forever, it also inspired the third-person action game genre, and eventually, Resident Evil Village. My next pick is Remake of Resident Evil 2. While Resident Evil 7 brought the series back to its horror roots, Resident Evil 2 Remake perfected it. It's absolutely stunning and contains one of the best beats in the series to date. For newcomers, it modernizes the best parts of the classic Resident Evil games, as Remake of Resident Evil 2 was updated with many of the best features, from new installments, ammo, crafting, over-the-shoulder camera, and expandable inventory slots. For the series veterans, it taps into your familiarity with the iconic RPD that defies expectations in a unique and terrifying way. It is designed with great care and intention. Easter eggs are scattered throughout the enclosure, accompanied by so many updates that fit so perfectly it's easy to forget they weren't present in the original. Next up, Resident Evil Remake. If there's one game in the series that perfected the tank control gameplay style, it's the remake of the original 2002 Resident Evil, the creme de la creme of authentic Resident Evil experience before the switch to third-party perspectives. Not only does the remake get rid of the cheesiness of the original game to make it darker and more serious, but Resident Evil Remake added on a ton of new content that you couldn't experience in the original, like Lisa Trevor's subplot. And, more importantly, Resident Evil Remake takes a page from the original Resident Evil 2's manual to make it a game that will keep you on the edge of your seat at every turn, thanks to the atmosphere and ambience of the Spencer Mansion in the size of the inclusion of a new enemy. Wrapping it up, we have Resident Evil 2. The original Resident Evil remains one of the most important games in history, but Resident Evil 2 is as, or more important than its predecessor. Resident Evil 2 has set many precedents that one would expect in a typical Resident Evil formula. That includes playing the main campaign with multiple branching characters that have their own story, which made those experiences stand out, while the remake is just as good and is arguably the most accessible way to experience Leon and Claire's hellish night in Raccoon City. The original Resident Evil 2 still offers plenty of distinction, charm, and a fear that deserves to be experienced at least once in life. That concludes today's video. If you found this video helpful, please do consider giving us a thumbs up, and don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. See you next time!